The sun rose slow over the rolling fields of Missouri, painting the worn farm in gold light. William and Jacob Carter, twin brothers, were just 19, but life had aged them beyond their years. The farm was small, debt-laden, and stubborn soil refused to yield much more than enough to keep them fed. Each dawn, the boys labored side by side, tending cattle, mending fences, hauling wood, always aware of how little the world had to offer their family. Yet, in the evenings, their spirits rose. By the dim firelight, William would sketch lines in the dirt while Jacob hummed a tune, and together they dreamed, not of love or marriage or home, but of something larger, gold. Stories of the Klondike reached Missouri by letter, by travelers, by whispers. Rivers full of gold, mountains rich beyond imagining, fortunes to be carved from frozen wilderness. "I'm tired of the farm holding us down," William said one night, staring into the coals. "There's nothing here but work and worry. Up north, we can change that. For Ma and Pa, for us, we could be free." Jacob's eyes glinted. "I've heard the same stories. Gold in the rivers, untouched, ours if we're brave enough. If we leave now, we'll never look back at this life." They spent weeks planning, gathering what little they had: a pair of rifles, a worn axe, a few blankets, and whatever coins they could scrape together. Their parents, though hesitant, understood the determination in their son's eyes. They offered blessings and warnings, but they could not tether the twins' ambition. When the morning came, the brothers loaded their meager possessions onto a wagon and set out. The world beyond Missouri stretched vast and unknown, forests, rivers, mountains, the promise of adventure and danger entwined. They spoke little on the first day, letting the rhythm of the wheels and the rattle of the axles carry their thoughts. As the farm shrank behind them, William felt a pang of guilt, but Jacob laughed, loud and reckless. "We'll be kings of gold, brother. You'll see. Nothing can stop us." William wanted to believe him. He wanted to hold on to the brother he had known his whole life, the one who never let fear get in the way. But even as they journeyed north, a shadow lingered, a whisper of something darker that would rise when gold touched their hands. For now, though, the road was open, the horizon endless, and the Carter twins together. And in that togetherness lay the first spark of hope and the first seeds of tragedy. The journey from Missouri to the Klondike was longer and harsher than William and Jacob had imagined. The twins traveled first by rickety wagon along dusty roads, crossing rivers swollen with spring runoff. In St. Louis, they boarded a steamer bound for Seattle, the air thick with salt and smoke, the deck crowded with men chasing the same glittering dream. Each face told a story of hunger, hope, and desperation. Strangers bound by ambition, yet each wary of the other. Seattle was chaos. Streets overflowed with prospectors buying tools, sleds, and supplies for the Chilkoot Trail. Timber and crates were stacked high, and every saloon overflowed with men trading stories of luck and ruin. The twins spent days haggling for what they needed: thick boots, warm coats, lanterns, and enough flour and salted meat to survive weeks of wilderness travel. They earned a few extra dollars playing Jacob's harmonica in the streets, a tune that drew smiles and sometimes coins from tired, harried men. When at last they reached the foot of the Chilkoot Pass, the real trial began. The trail was a jagged line of snow and ice, winding up cliffs and frozen rivers, dotted with men hauling 50-pound packs over shoulders many collapsing in exhaustion. William tightened the straps on his sled, counting every ounce of food. Jacob, always eager, grabbed his pickaxe and led the climb with reckless energy, singing to lift both their spirits. The snow was merciless. Blizzard winds ripped through layers of wool and canvas, and the cold seemed to seep into bone and spirit alike. Nights were spent huddled in tents, sharing meager rations, the twins' breath fogging the air as they whispered stories of home and their dreams of gold. Wolves prowled the ridges above, their eyes glinting in the moonlight, and sometimes the wind carried distant cries. Men lost to frostbite, to falls, or to despair. Yet, despite the hardship, the twins' bond grew stronger. William's caution balanced Jacob's boldness. Jacob's courage inspired William when doubt crept in. Together, they navigated treacherous ice bridges, climbed sheer slopes, and crossed rivers on thin, cracking ice. Each success was a small victory. Each night survived a triumph. By the time they descended from the Chilkoot, battered and exhausted, they had become more than brothers. They were partners in every sense, sharing the same hunger for fortune and survival. They had glimpsed the North's beauty in icy cliffs, frozen waterfalls, and the distant auroras dancing overhead, but they had also felt its cruelty. William wondered quietly whether their bond could withstand what lay ahead, unaware that the true test and the shadow of greed was still waiting in the gold-laden rivers of the Yukon. The frozen forests of the Yukon were silent, broken only by the crack of ice underfoot or the distant roar of a river swollen with spring melt. William and Jacob had set up a small camp near a narrow creek. Nights were long and bitter, but each evening they built a fire and huddled close, sharing stories of home and plans for fortune. One night, a blizzard swept down the valley, whipping snow into the tent and threatening to bury them alive. William shivered violently, hands raw from hauling firewood, while Jacob fended off panic with humor, singing old tunes from Missouri. Together, they kept the fire alive, the flames licking the cold darkness, a lifeline against the merciless night. Days of frost-bitten fingers and frozen rations tested them further. A sudden avalanche on a nearby slope nearly crushed their supplies, and a precarious ice crossing left William gasping while Jacob pulled him from the river's edge. The physical danger only strengthened the unspoken bond between them. Neither could survive here alone, and each relied on the other's instincts and courage. The days were brutal, the nights colder than any nightmare, but together they survived. Brotherhood, fierce, unbreakable, and naive, carried them forward, keeping their spirits alive even as the wilderness tried to crush them. But the North had its lessons, and soon the glitter of gold would be more powerful than any bond of blood. The mountains waited silently, ready to test courage, loyalty, and the strength of the heart. Dawson City rose out of the Yukon wilderness like a mirage of smoke, mud, and madness. The streets were clogged with men dragging sleds, shouting, laughing, and arguing over rumors of claims. Wooden shacks leaned on one another, saloons poured whiskey onto the frozen ground, and the air smelled of wet timber, coal, and desperation. William and Jacob pushed through the chaos, hearts pounding, eyes wide. Every corner promised wealth or ruin. Prospectors from all corners of the continent and beyond shouted over one another, swapping tales of hidden creeks, motherlodes, and the cruel tricks of the North. The twins could see immediately that this place was alive, hungry, and dangerous, and survival depended on wits as much as strength. They rented a tiny room above the Golden Saloon, the floorboards shaking as men stamped their boots and played poker with stakes higher than the twins had ever imagined. Jacob's eyes gleamed at the frenzy, while William tried to remain cautious, noting who seemed trustworthy and who drank a little too hard, laughed a little too loud, and carried knives beneath their coats. The brothers spent their days gathering supplies, staking small test claims, and learning the rhythms of the Yukon. Nights were filled with music and whiskey. Jacob often played a fiddle in the saloons for coins, drawing tips from drunken men who were happy to pay for tunes while hoping luck would favor them elsewhere. William preferred quiet reflection, counting coins, cataloging supplies, and keeping watch over Jacob's impulsive antics. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Every day men were arrested for fights, robbed for gold, or lost to the icy rivers and steep ridges. Yet for every misfortune, the city brimmed with stories of sudden fortune. The mother lode discovered by a man too reckless to realize he had struck it. Fortunes changing hands in a single day. The twins felt it too. The pulse of the city, the energy of ambition, and the first faint whispers of temptation. Jacob's laughter grew louder, more daring, fueled by the tales of those around him. William watched him, uneasy, sensing the first cracks in their shared dream. By the end of their first week in Dawson, they had enough supplies to stake a real claim, enough coins for music to buy sleds, and a sense that their dream was within reach. But beneath the excitement, the shadows of greed and rivalry began to stir. A whisper in the wind, a chill in the blood, a warning that the North tests men not just with frost and snow, but with the weight of gold on the heart. The promised land had arrived, dazzling, intoxicating, and dangerous beyond measure. The morning light glinted off the snow and ice as William and Jacob trudged along a narrow creek, sleds dragging behind them. Weeks of searching had led them here, a shallow stream hidden between cliffs, its waters sparkling with flakes of gold. William knelt by the edge, scooping gravel into his pan, and watched the sunlight catch the first glint of real gold. "Look at this," he whispered, awe in his voice. Jacob's eyes widened, pupils dilated, and a slow grin spread across his face. For the first time, the North had yielded its secret. They worked tirelessly, staking their claim with careful precision. Each pan of gravel seemed heavier with promise, every nugget a tangible proof of the dream they had chased for months. For William, the thrill was tempered by caution. He cataloged, measured, and marked boundaries meticulously. Jacob, on the other hand, grew restless, staring at the gold with hunger in his eyes that went beyond ambition. As the days passed, their work doubled, then tripled. Word of their find spread quietly through Dawson City, drawing curious glances and envious whispers from nearby prospectors. The twins were careful to keep their discovery hidden, burying excess gold in small caches and taking turns keeping watch. Nights were long, filled with the quiet crackle of fire and the distant howl of wolves. But cracks began to show. Jacob lingered near the caches longer than necessary, fingers brushing the glittering pieces, eyes darting at every sound from the woods. William noticed it, tried to speak to him about restraint and shared duty, but Jacob brushed off his warnings with a laugh, insisting they deserved everything the creek offered. "You worry too much, William," Jacob said one evening, tossing a nugget in his hand. "We earned this. No one else deserves a thing. Why shouldn't it be ours?" William's stomach tightened. He had always trusted Jacob implicitly, but something had changed. The North had exposed not just the cruelty of the wilderness, but the fragile nature of greed. The gold was shining brighter than ever, and Jacob's eyes reflected it more than the morning sun. That night, as William slept, he could hear Jacob muttering to himself by the fire, counting, imagining, plotting. A shadow passed over the brother he had loved unconditionally. The creek had given them riches, yes, but it had also sown the first seeds of betrayal. In the silent, icy night, William felt it in his bones. The journey north had changed more than their fortunes. It had begun to change the very nature of Jacob's heart. And the wilderness, patient and indifferent, waited for the consequences to unfold. One morning, William caught Jacob kneeling beside the cache they'd buried in the woods, running his fingers over the nuggets as if memorizing their weight and shape. "Jacob," William said firmly, "we agreed to split everything equally. Don't start thinking of taking more than your share." Jacob straightened abruptly, face flushed with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "I'm just thinking ahead, William. We've worked too hard to let someone else take it. Maybe we should be careful. Maybe careful means keeping more than half for ourselves." William froze, the words hanging heavy in the crisp northern air. He had seen greed before, but never in Jacob. Never in the twin who had shared his blood, his laughter, and his hardships. The days that followed were tense. Every pan of gold became a test of trust. Arguments erupted over the smallest details: where to stake tools, how to guard the caches, even how to ration food. Jacob's insistence on secrecy and ownership grew sharper, and William began to fear what he had once thought impossible, that the brother he loved could be consumed by greed. Then came the night of the storm. Snow pelted the small cabin they had built, howling around them like the wails of ghosts. Jacob, restless, slipped outside and returned hours later with his coat full of gold, claiming he was just moving it for safety. William watched him, suspicion coiling in his chest. "You're planning something, aren't you?" William demanded, the firelight casting shadows across his furrowed face. Jacob's eyes darted away, and he muttered something about survival and opportunity. William knew the truth. The glitter of the creek had awakened something darker, something he hadn't thought existed in his brother. The wilderness around them was indifferent to human conflict. Wolves prowled, ice cracked underfoot, rivers raged, yet the greatest danger now wasn't outside. It was between them, invisible and growing, a fissure wider than any canyon. By the next morning, William realized the inevitable. The gold would not only test their courage, but their hearts, and one of them would pay the ultimate price for ambition unchecked, for trust betrayed. The dawn broke cold and gray, a thin veil of light over the frozen creek. William stirred in the cabin, the warmth of the fire doing little to ease the chill in his bones. He rubbed his eyes and reached for the gold pouch, only to find it lighter than it should have been. Panic struck him like a blow. "Jacob!" he shouted, heart hammering. No answer, only the wind whistling through the trees, carrying a whisper of guilt that William could almost hear. He ran outside. Tracks in the snow led away from the cabin, disappearing over the ridge. Jacob had taken it all. The gold they had dug, sweated, and dreamed of for months. William's stomach twisted with disbelief and rage. The brother he had trusted implicitly, the twin who had shared his every hardship, was gone. For hours, William searched the snowy hills, calling out for Jacob. The cold cut through him, frost biting his fingers and face, but he could not abandon hope. Every footprint was a promise broken, every empty cache a reminder that greed could turn flesh and blood into a stranger. Meanwhile, Jacob fled deeper into the Yukon, the gold heavy in his pack. The exhilaration of betrayal mingled with fear. His mind raced with plans, but the wilderness showed no mercy. Rivers overflowed, slopes crumbled, and nights alone were haunted by hunger and doubt. The euphoria of theft quickly gave way to paranoia, and the gold that should have been triumph became a weight crushing him from the inside. William, battered and freezing, finally found shelter in a cave near the creek. Exhausted, he tended to frost-bitten hands and sore muscles, replaying every moment that had led to this fracture. He realized the cruel truth. The North hadn't just tested their courage, it had revealed their hearts. And Jacob's heart had turned. Even as despair threatened to consume him, William resolved to survive. The wilderness could kill the body, but it could not break the spirit that refused to surrender. One brother was lost to greed, the other determined to endure, carrying the bitter lessons of trust, love, and ambition like scars he would bear forever. As night fell, the stars over the Yukon seemed indifferent to human sorrow. William stared into the sky, feeling the cold wind, knowing that greed had shattered their bond, and that the North had claimed another victim, not from the frost or the wolves, but from the darkness that lives in every human heart. The betrayal was complete, and the world had changed for both brothers, one triumphant in theft, the other alone but alive, forced to face the aftermath of a fractured dream. Jacob's triumph was short-lived. The stolen gold burned in his hands like molten lead, tempting him to reckless choices. Instead of using it wisely, he drank heavily in Dawson City's crowded saloons, gambling away nugget after nugget to men who laughed at his naivety. Nights blurred into days, whiskey clouding his mind, cards sliding across tables like the fate he had thrown away. The gold that should have been his fortune became dust in the bottom of someone else's pocket. Alone, Jacob wandered further into the wilderness, trying to escape the shame he could not face. The North, once a canvas for ambition, now became a mirror for his vices. Frost-bitten fingers and hunger reminded him of what he had risked and lost. His laughter turned to bitter muttering. His plans to rebuild crumbled under the weight of his own greed. Meanwhile, William, battered but unbroken, eked out survival along the same frozen creek where betrayal had struck. Each day was a battle, fishing for small game, melting snow for water, finding shelter in abandoned cabins. The wilderness was merciless, yet he endured. Pain became routine, cold a companion, and silence a teacher. William reflected on Jacob's downfall, recognizing the danger of letting greed consume a man, even one you love. Despite exhaustion and despair, William clung to a principle that Jacob had abandoned: trust in one's own courage, integrity, and patience. Every day, he strengthened his body and mind, learning to read the snow, predict the rivers, and respect the unforgiving land. He survived not because he was lucky, but because he refused to surrender to bitterness or fear. As weeks passed, Jacob's once bright eyes dulled. He had lost not only the gold, but the respect of everyone he had met. Men mocked the twin who had once seemed invincible, calling him reckless and foolish. Dawson's streets became hostile, saloons dangerous, and solitude his only companion. Spring crept slowly across the Klondike, turning frozen rivers into roaring channels and softening the earth beneath William Carter's boots. With the thaw came change, not just in the land, but in the direction of the brothers' lives. For the first time since Jacob's betrayal, William felt the faintest stirrings of hope. He had taken on work wherever he could find it, hauling freight for weary prospectors, repairing cabins battered by winter storms, even busking with an old borrowed fiddle in Dawson's muddy streets. People respected him, not for wealth, but for grit. Each earned dollar, each favor returned, each day survived added weight to the foundation he was rebuilding. Slowly, William gathered enough to partner in a modest claim outside town, one that produced small but steady returns. It wasn't a motherlode, but it was honest, dependable, and his. He lived simply, saving his earnings, finding strength in routine. The ache of betrayal still lived in him, a scar beneath the surface, but he allowed it to guide him rather than poison him. He refused to let hatred take root. The North had taught him that survival required clarity, and clarity required peace. Jacob, meanwhile, spiraled downward. After losing the last of the stolen gold in a crooked poker game, he bounced from saloon to saloon like a man without a name. Creditors chased him. Drunken brawls left him bloodied and bruised. Even men who had once partied beside him now saw only a fool begging for drinks and boasting of fortunes long gone. Jacob slept in stables, then under porches, then wherever the cold allowed him to curl up without freezing. His decline was swift and merciless. The confidence he once carried, sharp, bright, charming, crumbled into a hollow version of the man he had been. Rumors swirled through town. Jacob Carter had been spotted stealing food, begging miners for scraps, blaming everyone but himself for his ruin. No one offered him help. No one trusted him. And behind all the bravado, Jacob felt the sting of guilt he could never admit aloud. One brother walked with purpose, tested but unbroken. The other stumbled blindly, lost in shadows of his own making. Their paths had once run side by side across fields in Missouri, up trails carved into mountains, over frozen lakes, beneath northern stars. Now those paths had diverged so far that neither could see the other. Yet in quiet moments, at the creek, at the fire, under the sky, William still thought of Jacob, wondered if he might return, wondered if redemption was possible, wondered if family could ever truly be severed. Jacob, in his delirium and regret, thought of William too. But he could not face the man he had tried to kill. And so the brothers continued on their separate roads, one toward a hard-earned future, one toward the bottom of a well of his own digging. Spring came to the Klondike, revealing rivers swollen with meltwater and hills slick with new mud. William Carter stood alone on a ridge above Dawson City, the wind cold but gentle, like a hand brushing away the last remnants of winter. Below him, the town buzzed, men shouting, dogs barking, hammers ringing, the same restless frenzy that had once drawn two Missouri boys north with fire in their hearts. But now, only one remained. William had rebuilt his life with quiet determination. He became known in Dawson not as a lucky prospector, but as a man who kept his word, who didn't drink himself blind, who helped others when the trails turned bad. He earned respect one frost-bitten day at a time. Yet each evening, when the sun dipped crimson behind the mountains, William thought of Jacob. Word of Jacob's fate drifted through town in fragments. Some said he'd gambled away every last nugget in a single drunken spree. Others claimed he staggered out of town one night and never returned. A trapper insisted he saw a man matching Jacob's description wandering aimlessly near the Yukon River, thin as a ghost. No one knew for certain. No one ever would. William felt the loss like an old wound. His brother had betrayed him, yes, stolen from him, abandoned him, nearly killed him. But before the gold, before the greed, they had shared a life. The fields in Missouri, the river swims, the laughter, the dreams whispered under early summer stars. Twins, brothers, a bond deeper than blood. And now only memory remained. One evening, William walked down to the river's edge, crouched, and let the icy water run through his fingers. He whispered a quiet farewell, not just to Jacob, but to the boy he used to be, the optimistic farm kid who believed the world could be conquered with courage alone. Life had proven harsher, but it had also shown him something more valuable than gold: character forged by hardship, resilience in the face of betrayal, and the strength to rise again. When he finally left the Klondike, William did not take much with him. A small pouch of gold dust, a few tools, a journal, and the wisdom that only suffering can carve into a man's soul. As the steamer carried him south, he watched the northern lights shimmer for the last time over the darkening hills. He whispered, "Goodbye, Jacob. I hope you found peace wherever you wandered." The Klondike had given him a brutal lesson, but also a truth he would carry all his days. Gold can make a man wealthy, but only integrity makes him whole. And so ended the tale of the Carter brothers, one lifted by courage, the other fallen by greed. A bitter, beautiful reminder that fortune tests men, but character defines them. In the end, the wilderness teaches lessons no classroom ever could. It strips men down to their truest selves, revealing not who they wish to be, but who they are when comfort is gone and temptation stands close at hand. Gold has a way of sharpening desire and dulling loyalty. It whispers that success is worth any cost, that trust is weakness, and that even blood can be bargained away. Many learned too late that the greatest danger was never the cold, the hunger, or the long miles of frozen land. It was misplaced faith. Trust is powerful, but fragile. Given wisely, it can carry people through impossible odds. Given blindly, it can leave a man alone in the snow, wondering where everything went wrong. The North remembers those moments, though it never speaks of them. So choose carefully who walks beside you when the stakes are high. Measure words against actions and never assume loyalty simply because it is familiar. In a world driven by ambition, integrity is the rarest currency of all. And once lost, no amount of gold can ever buy it back.